Hey, this is Sheri Summers with Accent on Speaking. Today we're going to be talking about the American accent and how you can sound better in English. Hi everybody and welcome. I'm Sheri Summers with Accent on Speaking at accentonspeaking.com, and today I'd like to answer a few questions that were sent in to me by people from around the world about the American accent and about English pronunciation. And today we're going to be talking about the difference between the vowel sound in man and businessman. We'll also talk about the difference in the TH in the word with, and we'll talk a little bit about the ED that you find at the end of past tense words and some adjectives. And we'll talk about how they're pronounced. So before we get started, if you would like to ask a question about the American accent, about English pronunciation, feel free to ask me at www.asksheri.com. And I'll try to answer your question in an upcoming episode. So today, let's get started. The first question was sent in to me by Jean-Christophe, who asked, sometimes I hear the word man pronounced with an ah. This is the ah as in cat, but I can't hear it in the word businessman. Well, there's a really good reason for that. It's because it's not there. It's quite interesting because this word M-A-N does have the vowel sound ah, ah. This is the sound that is like the sound is in cat. It's a sound that doesn't exist so much in other languages, so chances are it's going to be one that isn't really comfortable for you until you get used to it. We need to open our jaw a little more and pull back the lips just a tiny bit to get this ah, ah. If you don't open your mouth enough, you might say men, M-E-N. If you don't pull back your lips enough, you might say mon. I'm not really sure what mon means, but be really careful that you open your jaw a little more than you might think and pull your lips back a bit. So that gives us the ah, ah sound. So when we use the word man, we do use this vowel sound. But what's interesting is some of the career names, some of the job names, like businessman, or we don't use these as much as we used to because these days we often say person. But for example, we might say business person. We might say police officer. But if you were to use the man on it, you'll notice you really don't hear that A in there anymore. Let's say businessman, policeman, fireman. What happened was the A in here is no longer in a stressed syllable. So what we've done is we go through and we almost kick them out. And when we kick them out of a syllable, the sound gets replaced with this little sound, what we call a schwa, So here's what they sound like. Businessman, man, not man, man. He's a good businessman. Policeman, man, not man. He's a good policeman. And fireman, fireman, not fireman. But you've got to watch out because if you're talking about somebody's superhero title, then you would say man. For example, we don't say Superman. We really do say Superman. We don't say Batman. We really do say Batman and Spider-Man. So if it's a job, you can go ahead and reduce the A to If it's a superhero title, keep the ah. All right. Okay, I hope that helps. And if you haven't noticed these sounds before, go ahead and listen. Listen to native speakers and see what you can hear. Now, I have to tell you, until your ear gets trained, sometimes you can't hear what some of the things I've been talking about. But once you do really tune in, you'll really start noticing some of the sounds that you may not have caught before. So tune in and see if you can hear this. All right, great. Thanks so much for asking that. Here is the second question. Ramsey asked, why do I sometimes hear the word with pronounced with an unvoiced TH, that's a and sometimes with a voiced TH, which would be v? It's actually a really simple answer. The answer is they both work. They're both okay. Now, I tend to use the unvoiced TH, so I would say with you, without, with my friends. But I do hear people using that voiced sound sometimes, and that would be with you, with my friends, without. I hate to go without my friends. In my own opinion, I don't think that's quite as common as the unvoiced TH. In fact, if you were in the middle and you're not really sure what to say, I would probably push you towards the unvoiced TH. But there are a number of people who use the voiced TH. Sometimes people ask me, why are there these differences? Why do I hear different people say different things? My answer is, if you were to look at your native language, especially if it's a language that is spoken in a large area or over several countries, you'll notice the same things too. You'll notice that in some regions, people will use different sounds. So it can be related to location. It can be related sometimes to generation. You'll sometimes notice that older people might say things a little bit differently than younger people. And it sometimes just boils down to personal preference. So when you find that there are different possible sounds, it often has to do with either a region, an area where people come from, their age, whether they're young or old, or sometimes it's just how they personally like to say this. Now, even where I live, I do hear people say with, but really not as much. Almost everybody will say with, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So either one works. Whichever one you feel comfortable with, go ahead and use for this particular word. Just know that you don't have options for most things. Just some things you have options, and this is one that you do have an option. And by the way, when you go to a dictionary, you should find both options. You'll see that both will be listed, and if you see that, there's a pretty good chance you can choose the one that you like best. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that question. Let's take a look at the third question. The third question is about the ED. Now, I know some people have a problem with this ED. This is a question by Alcy, who asked, I know how to pronounce the ending ED in the past tense, but when I hear real-life English, I have the impression that people don't pronounce it all the time in everyday conversations. Is this true? My answer to the question is they do use the ED whenever they're using a word that would require an ED. My feeling is that sometimes when people speak quickly, you may not catch it if you're not used to it. You might not realize that's what you're hearing, but I really can't think of a situation where people should use ED but don't. So I think maybe it's because your ear isn't catching it quite yet, and that's okay. That's a very common thing when you're getting your ears tuned to being able to hear things that you haven't noticed before. So don't worry so much about it, but do know that the ED, it's pronounced. Now, the problem might be because it's so fast and you might not realize what you're hearing. So let's take a look at the rules of the ED. And it doesn't really matter if we're talking about past tense verbs. We might be talking about verbs like played, or we might be talking about some adjectives like bored. He's very bored. So here's what the rule is. If you have a word that ends with a voiced sound, and I just gave you two right now, the word play, for example, ends with a voiced sound. You can tell this because if you were to put your hand on your throat and say the word, do you feel your the vibration in your throat when you say A? Go ahead and try it if you want. Play, A. You'll notice that your voice, you'll hear your voice. You'll notice that there's a vibration in your throat. This is what we call a voiced sound. So if there's a voiced sound at the end of the word, when you add the ED will also be voiced. And this sound is D. D. It sounds like a D. D. So any word that has a voiced sound at the end and then has an ED added, the ED will sound like D. I played basketball. I played basketball. Does it sound a little bit different from the present tense when I say I play basketball? I play basketball. Past tense, I played basketball. I played basketball. Now, like I said, you might not catch it immediately if people are speaking quickly and you're not used to it, but it is there. It really is there. The same thing would happen with bored. When you use the R at the end of the word, go ahead and put your hand on your throat, and you can feel the vibration when you say bore, bored. So that's why the ED would sound like a D. Played, bored. Now, if you have a word that ends with an unvoiced sound, either sounds like the T and the P and the K sound. When you put your hand on your throat, if you test this out, you'll notice that you don't feel any vibration in your throat. That's because your voice box isn't moving. And when you have a word that ends with one of these unvoiced sounds, the ED will sound like T. Now, I should probably remove this T because this actually goes in another section. But words like, oh, let's say kiss, K-I-S-S, kiss. You notice that the S doesn't use your voice. You can test it out and see. So what we'll do is we'll add the ED, and this ED is also unvoiced. It sounds like T, T, sounds like a T. So our past tense word is kissed, kissed. Let's take the word check, for example. I will check something, and I have already, add an ED, we get checked, checked. Okay, because we go from the unvoiced K to an unvoiced T. So these are the basic rules. But what happens if we have a word that ends with a T or a D? In this case, we really can't add another T or D sound to it. It would be too awkward. So what we do is that's the time when you're going to hear a little vowel sound between the T and the D and the ED. So, for example, pat, for example, to pat your dog. In past tense, we're going to add the ED, and we end up with patted. Patted. He patted the dog. Or maybe blend. Blend. We put an ED on it, and we end up with blended. So in these particular words, you actually add an extra syllable on, and you hear the vowel sound, which in most cases is a schwa. Ud. Ud. Patted. Blended. Now, some of you might know this already, but if you haven't learned this before, really see if you can notice it, because you'll notice that people will use the T or the D sound, and you won't hear an extra vowel sound in the middle with that ED unless the word ends with a T or a D. I hope that makes sense, but it's very common, and yes, people are really saying it. They're not letting it drop. Just so you know, the S and the ES work in the same way, but I guess we could make that another lesson someday. So anyway, thank you so much for asking about that. I just want you to be able to become aware of how native English speakers are really speaking. I hear people tell me all the time, I didn't notice that until you pointed it out. And now I hear it everywhere, and now I'm able to use it. So just let these things kind of hang out in your brain. See if you can notice how other people are speaking once you've learned something new. And, of course, try it out yourself and eventually assimilate it into your everyday English. At least I hope that's what will happen for you. So again, if you have a quick question that you'd like me to answer, go ahead and go to asksheri.com. That's S-H-E-R-I, asksheri.com, and ask your question, and I'll see if I can get it answered in an upcoming episode. So thanks for spending these few minutes with me, and we'll be talking again soon about some of your questions, I hope. In the meantime, if you haven't had a chance, go pick up my free downloadable MP3 and transcript where I talk about the different parts of accent and what you'll need to know. There's no obligation involved. It's totally free. It's at accentonspeaking.com/gift. Accent, A-C-C-E-N-T, on, O-N, speaking, speaking.com/gift. And go ahead and pick that up, and I hope to see you again very soon. Thanks so much for being with me for this little bit of time, and take care, and go out and listen, and go out and speak and enjoy. Thanks.